Welcome to our long-form mystery series. In this story, we follow the strange disappearance of an entire family in 1991, a case that remained unsolved for over 3 decades. No one could open the cold steel door in their basement, until 2025, when it finally clicked open. Inside wasn't a corpse, but a man still alive. Was he truly the missing father from 1991, or something else entirely? This is The Cold Room No One Could Open. The story you're about to hear is a work of fiction. All names, characters, and events are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons or events is purely coincidental. What lies beyond the sealed cold room may keep you awake tonight. If this story pulled you in, don't forget to follow the channel, turn on notifications, and share it so others can uncover the mystery with you. By the time the sun rose over the town of E.V.E, Vermont, it had already been abandoned by time itself. The leaves in late autumn shivered in gray windhouses, stood silent with curtains half drawn like aging eyes, and the streets bore more memory than movement. It was here on the outer edge of Maple Pine Road, where the Chandler house still stood cracked, leaning slightly and coated in 30 years' worth of dust, decay, and silence. Locals didn't go near it, not since 1991. That was the year the Chandler family vanished without a trace. Walter Chandler was an electrical engineer who moved to E.V.E with his wife Marissa and their 6-year-old daughter Emily. People remembered them as quiet, distant, but pleasant enough. They lived in the old 2-story Victorian with a stone basement and a large iron door in the cellar, a strange feature for a residential home, but Walter claimed it was part of a failed wine storage design from the previous owners. He had plans to repurpose it as a private cold storage unit. He was the kind of man who always had plans. But on November 6, 1991, a neighbor noticed the Chandlers' mailbox overflowing the lights off for days, and their car still parked on the street untouched even after a snowfall. Police were called. A welfare check was conducted. The house was unlocked, the heater still running, dinner still in the oven. The family was gone. There was no sign of struggle, no forced entry, no message, just their belongings left behind, photos, clothing, toothbrushes, as if they'd simply evaporated. The only strange thing officers noted was the basement. A heavy steel door built into the foundation wall sealed tight. No knob, no lock, just a flat, seamless panel with a small rectangular seam and a worn metal keypad beside it. It wouldn't open. No combination ever worked. And Walter had left behind no plans, no schematics, nothing. Over time, the case went cold. The town moved on. The Chandler house was put up for sale. No one bought it. Then people started saying the place was cursed. In 2025, a demolition crew was hired by the city to finally clear the property. Years of legal entanglements had prevented it before, but now the structure was deemed unsafe, and a new zoning project aimed to replace the abandoned corner with modern housing. No one really cared anymore what had happened to the Chandlers. No one expected answers. Then the door opened. Miles Taggart, foreman of the 3-man demolition team, wasn't one for ghost stories. He believed in pipes, concrete, wood rot, and torque, but even he paused when he saw the basement. "Looks like a damn bank vault," he muttered, running his gloved fingers along the steel surface. His younger crewmate Devin shined a flashlight around the basement walls. Mold crept up like veins, and the air smelled like rust and wet leaves. "This, where they found nothing?" he asked. "Back in the day," "Yeah," Miles said. "Family gone." Poof. "Cops never got past this thing. Thought about blowtorching it back then, but chickened out. Town didn't want more damage." "You think there's something behind it?" Miles didn't answer right away. Instead, he approached the keypad. It was caked with grime, the numbers almost invisible. He reached out. Click. The sound was so soft it barely registered. But the team froze. Another click, louder this time. Mechanical. Like old Metal Gears finally deciding to live again. Then came the hiss, a slow, dragging wheeze of pressurized air as the steel slab groaned inward and began to open. No one touched it. A cold wind swept through the room. Inside the chamber, lights flickered on automatically. Fluorescents, still working, still powered. There was no dust inside, no debris. Only a sterile, frost-lined floor fogging faintly with condensation. In the center of the room lay a man on a flat medical-style cot. Naked except for a hospital gown. Breathing. Alive. Miles stumbled backward. Devon swore under his breath. The third crew member, Marcus, pulled out his phone and called 911. When paramedics arrived, they were silent, shocked. No one could explain it. The man appearing about 40 vital signs, strong pulse normal, matched every old photo ever taken of Walter Chandler. But the year was 2025. He should have been 75 years old. He looked exactly as he did in 1991. When asked his name, the man croaked one word, "Emily," and then he wept. Within 24 hours, the Chandler house was cordoned off. News vans arrived. Police reopened the old case files. Medical teams airlifted Walter Chandler or whoever he was to a secure facility in Montpelier. The cold room was examined, documented, studied, but no one could understand how a sealed chamber in a condemned house still had working power refrigeration and lights. The keypad had no battery. The entire system wasn't even connected to the house's main grid. It was its own power source. Someone or something had kept it alive for 34 years. Back in the hospital, Walter Chandler remained unconscious for 2 days. When he awoke, his memory was fragmented. He remembered taking Emily to the basement. He remembered Marissa screaming. He remembered the door closing. But he didn't remember opening it. Or who else had been in the room. Out in E.V.E, whispers returned. Some said the Chandlers had been part of something bigger. A government project. An experiment. Some believed the man wasn't Walter at all, just a replica. Others claimed they saw lights under the house at night for years, faint pulsing blue glows beneath the ground. But no one knew the truth. Because the only one who might wasn't talking. Not yet. Walter Chandler opened his eyes on the third morning after being pulled from the cold room. For 34 years, the world thought he was dead. But there he was, in a sterile hospital room, under heavy security, confused, groggy, and alive. Doctors had already run every test imaginable. His body temperature was slightly lower than normal, but otherwise he was stable. Remarkably so. No muscle atrophy, no frostbite, no signs of long-term unconsciousness or coma. It was as though the last 3 decades had barely touched him. And that was the problem. Dr. Elena Prieto, the lead physician assigned to his case, didn't trust the numbers. She had never seen anything like this. The samples from his blood didn't behave normally. His white cell count was too low, yet he showed no signs of infection. His metabolic readings suggested someone in a deep hypometabolic state, the kind theorized in long-term spaceflight. But that kind of suspension wasn't real. Not yet. Not in 1991. She leaned over his bed the moment he stirred. "Mr. Chandler," she said softly. "Can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered, then focused. He turned his head toward her slowly, like his neck remembered gravity only faintly. "Where's Emily?" "You've asked about her before," Dr. Prieto said gently. "Can you tell me the last thing you remember?" He blinked, his eyes welled with tears. "We were in the basement. She was cold. She said she heard something from behind the door. A humming. Then she disappeared. Just disappeared." He looked at his hands, then whispered, "I followed her. I think I stepped into the room, then it closed." Dr. Prieto glanced at the officer stationed in the room's corner. He subtly clicked his pen, activating a recording device. "Mr. Chandler, what year do you think it is?" "Type 1. She hesitated. "It's 2025. His face didn't register shock, only blank, eerie silence. "I know that's wrong," he whispered. "But I don't feel surprised." He turned his head away from her. I've known for a long time. I just didn't want to believe it." Back in E.V.E, Maple Pine Road was closed to the public. The Chandler house had become a war zone of forensic teams, electrical engineers, military contractors, and quiet men in dark suits with no name tags. The cold room was dismantled piece by piece, though no one could determine who built it. There were no blueprints, no records of its construction, and no evidence it had ever been serviced by local utilities. Inside, beneath a removable floor panel, authorities found a hidden compartment. Inside it, dozens of handwritten pages sealed in a vacuum-tight container. Walter's handwriting. But the pages weren't letters. They were equations, diagrams, hypotheses, calculations referencing time distortion, biostasis, and non-linear temperature transfer. He hadn't been building a wine cellar. He had been building something else entirely. Detective Kayla Brandt, recently transferred from Boston, had a reputation for not backing down. She'd read the Chandler file twice before arriving in town, and a third time before setting foot in the house. She stood in the basement now, arms crossed, staring at the open, cold room with a frown carved deep across her forehead. "People don't just survive 3 decades without a scratch," she muttered. "And people definitely don't invent time-freezing refrigerators in their basements without someone noticing." A tech pulled her aside. "Ma'am, we found something unusual in the wall behind the chamber." He led her to a section of concrete that had been cut cleanly away. Behind it was an array of old VHS tapes carefully labeled with dates: OCT 1990, NOV 1991. A single player sat beside them, dustless. Back at headquarters, Brandt watched the first tape. It showed Walter, sitting in front of a camera. He looked tired. His voice was tense. "Experiment log, October 22nd, 1990. Subject A responded negatively to sustained stasis beyond 96 hours. Neural degradation accelerated beyond repair. Adjustments must be made to chamber delta temperatures and acoustic shielding." He paused, swallowing hard. "Emily doesn't know what I'm doing yet. Marissa suspects. I can't stop now. The project is too far along. If I'm right, if the cold can suspend decay, suspend memory, then we can save them all. I just need more time." He leaned closer to the lens. "I have to find a way to pause life. Just long enough, just until it's safe again." Brandt stopped the tape. Her chest tightened. This wasn't a missing person case anymore. It was something far deeper, far stranger. At the hospital, Dr. Prieto sat with Walter again. His vitals were stable, but something in his eyes had changed. He stared at the ceiling, blinking slowly. "They told me I'd only be in there for a few days," he said quietly. "Just until it passed. Just until it was quiet again." "Who told you?" she asked. He blinked again, slowly. "I don't know." "You said Emily disappeared?" Walter nodded. She heard something, like a voice behind the wall. Not words, just pressure. It was calling to her. And when she got too close to the panel, he choked. She vanished, not like a magic trick, just gone. And Marissa, I think she followed. I told her not to. I begged her. But she screamed and ran in and the door shut. He looked at Dr. Prieto. "I never meant to stay in there, but something kept me asleep, kept me frozen. For 34 years. He nodded. "But I still dreamed." "What did you dream?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "A room, like the cold room, but bigger, no walls, just a hum, and something watching me the whole time." He began shaking. "It knew my name." That night, the security footage at the hospital caught something unusual. At exactly 3:13 a.m., Walter sat up in bed, eyes wide, pupils dilated. A nurse entered the room moments later, checking monitors, unaware. He turned to her and said a phrase no one could explain. "It's awake now." Then he flatlined for exactly 17 seconds. No heartbeat, no breath. And then without CPR or assistance, he sat back up. Breathing. Alive. Again. Detective Brandt received a call at 5:48 a.m. from one of the forensic engineers. "We ran a scan of the power signature coming off that chamber," he said. "It's not drawing from the grid, and it's not geothermal." "Then what the hell is it?" she asked. There was a pause. "It's pulsing, like it's alive." Meanwhile, back in the Chandler house, one of the techs discovered a final panel hidden in the cold room ceiling. Inside, it was a device, black metallic humming faintly. Engraved with a symbol no one could identify, a spiral intersecting a triangle surrounded by 5 dots. and a label in blocky serif font. Model E.V.E. Primary Access Relay, RECLAIM Division. There was no record of any such project in any national or international database. Except one mention, in a CIA document declassified in 2007 under the Project Legacy files, subject RECLAIM protocol suspended indefinitely. All test environments sealed. If any unauthorized relay is activated, initiate contingency code Sigma 4. Back in the hospital, Walter Chandler woke again. But this time his voice wasn't the same. And he said, "I think it followed me back." The nurse who had been monitoring Walter Chandler the night he whispered, "I think it followed me back" later said the moment was like hearing someone speak in two frequencies at once. His mouth moved, she recalled during debriefing, but I swear to God there was a second voice deeper under his, like something overlapping. It rattled the inside of my ears. Walter had no recollection of saying it. He didn't remember the code blue, the 17-second flatline, or that when he woke up again, the heart monitor briefly registered 2 heartbeats. He just remembered the cold, a silence so thick it hummed behind his eyes, and eyes not his own watching from beyond the walls. Detective Brandt reviewed the hospital footage a dozen times. She even brought in an audio engineer to isolate the secondary frequency. "There's something here," the engineer said, tweaking the waveform. "Look, his voice is layered. Human. But the second track is something else. Like synthetic vibration, but warped. Almost organic." He played the filtered version back. The second voice said something different from the surface words. While Walter said, "I think it followed me back," the second voice, lower and slower, whispered, "We were never meant to return." Brandt didn't know what chilled her more, the words themselves, or the calm certainty in how they were spoken. In Montpellier, a Department of Defense official arrived under the pretense of a biocontainment risk. His name was Cole Hensley, or at least that's what the ID said. He had no social media presence, no known family, no public history. He was accompanied by 2 men in plain clothes and one device, a compact scanner, with a pulsing amber light. It was designed to detect resonance anomalies, the kind theoretically emitted by objects or organisms exposed to nonlinear temporal isolation. When they scanned Walter's bed, the device beeped. Signal match, 87.3%, harmonic distortion, code classification, event, type 3A. Brandt stepped forward. "What the hell does that mean?" Hensley didn't look at her. "It means he brought something back with him." Meanwhile, at the Chandler house, excavation under the basement revealed an access tunnel that didn't appear on any town records. The tunnel had been sealed with a metallic gel that hardened like bone, not concrete. At the end of the tunnel was a door. Not a steel door like the first one. This one was stone, and it was warm to the touch. The symbol above it matched the one on the black device, a spiral intersecting a triangle surrounded by 5 dots. But this time a single word was carved into the arch. E.V.E. The team halted work until Hensley's group could assess it. But by the time they arrived, the door had cracked slightly open from the inside. No one dared go through, not yet. Walter Chandler sat in his hospital room under full observation. Since his revival, he spoke less, but when he did, the second voice sometimes returned. Not always. Just enough to be undeniable. He began writing compulsively on napkins on the bedsheet on the walls with a pen snuck in by accident. The same symbol over and over, but not just the spiral triangle. Others, too. A jagged hourglass. A circle split into quadrants. A glyph resembling a human face with no mouth. Each had a label beneath them in his handwriting, echo. Entry, containment, rejection. Dr. Prieto finally asked him why he was drawing them. Walter turned to her blank-eyed and said something that made her skin crawl. "These are the doors. Each of them leads to a different kind of silence." That night he tried to leave. Security footage showed Walter standing up from his bed at 3:03 a.m., removing his IVs with no reaction to pain and walking calmly down the hall. He moved through 3 secured doors without a key card, without touching them. The final door to the outside only stopped him when the alarms finally triggered, and 4 guards tackled him to the floor. He did not resist. When asked where he was going, he only said, "It hears me better when I'm closer to the ground." Detective Brandt confronted Hensley later that morning. "Enough with the riddles," she demanded. "What is R=AIM? Why does this man know symbols from a program that doesn't exist?" Hensley didn't flinch. "You're not cleared for that. People are terrified. There's a sealed room under that house that's warm. Warm. It's made of stone and humming like it's breathing. If you know something." He finally turned to her. "REAIM wasn't a weapon program. It wasn't even American." She blinked. "Then what?" He sighed. "It was observational. We weren't trying to create something. We were trying to contain something that had already arrived." Brandt's voice lowered. "From where?" Hensley shook his head. "We don't ask that anymore." Later that afternoon, Walter stopped speaking entirely. He became catatonic, unmoving, but eyes wide open. When a nurse tried to close his lids, they snapped back open. He stayed like that for hours. Until the sun went down. Then he stood and began walking again. Only this time he wasn't alone. Security footage from that night showed Walter moving down the hallway, but at each intersection, the cameras distorted, froze, and in the static between frames, other figures could be seen. Barely. Outlines. Shadows moving behind him. In one frame, frozen by analysts, a single phrase appeared scratched into the hallway wall, one that hadn't been there before. "We are returning through him." And in the Chandler basement, the warm stone door finally opened all the way. A stairwell descended beneath it, lined with pulsating white light. The temperature in the room dropped by 17 degrees in 10 minutes. The spiral symbol on the door began to rotate slowly. It wasn't just carved stone. It was a mechanism, an opening. At 2:13 a.m., every security camera in the hospital went black for 12 seconds. When they came back online, Walter Chandler was gone. So were 2 nurses. And every clock in the building, digital and analog, had reset to 1991. The hospital remained in lockdown for 48 hours after Walter Chandler disappeared. Every camera, every device jammed, glitched, or frozen. Backup power systems failed without warning. Even analog watches stopped ticking once every few seconds, like they were hesitating. 2 nurses, Cara Deems and Raymond Lee, vanished along with Walter. Neither were found in the building, but Lee's ID badge was discovered on the 4th floor. Inside a locked janitor closet. Melted. Detective Brandt watched the footage over and over, the same 12-second blackout at 2:13 a.m. when everything stopped. And when it resumed, Walter was simply gone, like he had never existed. And yet, every door in the building had remained physically locked, every exit still secure. He hadn't walked out. He had been removed. In E.V.E, the newly opened stairwell beneath the stone door of the Chandler house now extended nearly 30 feet down. The walls were smooth, unnaturally so, and traced with lines of pulsing white light that gave off no heat. The deeper they went, the more the signals dropped. Communication radios failed after 6 steps. By the time the team reached the bottom, even analog compasses were spinning. At the end of the corridor was a second room, spherical, echoing, quiet. In its center, a metal table with a cylinder sitting atop it. No buttons, no controls, just a pressure seal and a tag. Property of REAIM, Genesis Vault, Subject Class, E.V.E. One technician, nervous and breathing fast, asked aloud, "Wait, like Adam and Eve?" The response came not from any human voice, but from the walls themselves. A low tone, not quite sound, not quite vibration. And then a pulse of light that made everyone's hearts beat out of rhythm. They left the chamber in silence. That night, 2 of them suffered seizures. One of them drew a spiral triangle symbol into his own chest with a fork before falling unconscious. The third walked 3.7 miles barefoot into the woods behind the Chandler house. He has not been found. Back in Washington, Cole Hensley sat before a sealed conference room under the Pentagon. Across from him, 2 generals, 1 civilian intelligence liaison, and an older woman wearing dark glasses indoors. Her name was not disclosed, only her affiliation. Oversight Division, Silent Room. She spoke first. "We activated Project E.V.E. once, in 1988. The test site was in Siberia. We opened a threshold and something looked back. One of the generals scoffed. This is mythology. She turned to him slowly. Then explain why time bends around the Chandler subject. Explain why the cold room uses a power signature not from Earth. And explain why all 5 symbols match the right spiral diagram recovered from the Tunguska wreckage in 1908. Brandt, also in the room as a civilian consultant, stared at the last line. You're saying this is extraterrestrial? The woman didn't blink. No, not extraterrestrial, extratemporal. It doesn't come from a different planet. It comes from a different direction in time, not the past, not the future. Something adjacent, parallel. A place where entropy reversed and language moves backward. Brandt whispered. That's why Walter speaks in 2 voices. The woman nodded. Because the other voice isn't using his lungs. It's using his memory. Back at the Chandler house, a faint signal began broadcasting from beneath the basement. A sub-frequency ping that disrupted local wildlife and knocked out car radios within a 3-mile radius. Hensley's team triangulated the source to the cold room's core beneath the Genesis vault, buried under 15 feet of bedrock. The ping repeated every 47 minutes, each cycle slightly faster than the last. When converted into waveform and run through software, the pattern formed a spectrogram. The image, a human face, mouth open, screaming. That night, Walter Chandler reappeared. Not in a hospital, but in a supermarket. 3 towns away. Surveillance cameras showed him walking in at 3:41 a.m., barefoot, skin-pale clothes, hospital-issue eyes glassy. He picked up a carton of milk. He didn't pay. He walked directly to the cereal aisle and collapsed. When EMTs arrived, his pulse was stable, but his brain waves weren't. They showed dual patterns as though 2 consciousnesses were cycling in and out. During brief moments of lucidity, he repeated a phrase. She's in the vault. I couldn't get her out. Emily's still inside. Then his eyes rolled back. His voice deepened into the dual register again. She doesn't remember who she is, but the room does. DNA from Walter's fingernails was tested. Traces of another individual were found. Not Marissa, not Emily, not either nurse. The sample came back with no match in any global database. But mitochondrial markers suggested something older. Not evolutionarily, but temporally. It was as if the DNA had aged differently through a different kind of timeline. An evolutionary side path, one that branched not forward but outward. The phrase Project E.V.E. was traced back to a Cold War black project under joint U.S.-Soviet observation. Originally called temporal acoustic folding, it had one goal: preserve life by freezing it outside of entropy. But the result wasn't preservation. It was division. Test subjects reported dreams of doorways that opened inward, of voices that came before, thought of waking up inside versions of themselves where they were not alone. One test subject in 1989 wrote a final phrase before clawing out his own eyes. The cold doesn't stop death, it lets death wait inside you. Back in custody, Walter Chandler was restrained, sedated, and placed in a black site medical ward. A neurologist asked him one final question. Do you know what came back with you? Walter smiled faintly and said, It was never behind me, it was always underneath me. Then he whispered, We opened the wrong side of time. That same night, the spiral triangle symbol was found burned into the roof of the Chandler house. No one heard a sound. No one saw a light. But the next morning, the entrance to the underground vault was gone, as if it had never existed. In the early hours of the morning, Walter Chandler sat upright in his secure bed, even though he was heavily sedated. He whispered 3 words to the silent room. She's still humming. The security footage captured no movement beyond him. But the EEG readings on his brain showed something else, another set of brainwave patterns overlaying his own. Not echoes. Synchronization. Like 2 radios accidentally tuned to the same frequency from opposite ends of the country. Detective Brandt had grown quiet in recent days. She no longer challenged Hensley, no longer demanded full access to classified materials. She simply watched. And asked better questions. The latest why does he keep saying she doesn't remember who she is? Hensley didn't answer at first, then handed her a thin file. Project E.V.E. Field Test 02. Subject child female. 6Y objective. Memory displacement through time suspension. Status indeterminate. Brant read the line 3 times. You tested this on his daughter. No, Hensley replied. We think he did. Without approval, without full understanding. She dropped the file onto the table. That child has been missing for 34 years. She may not be missing, he said. Just unreachable. Inside the sealed vault, before it vanished, investigators took over 600 photographs. One image, when enhanced, showed a strange object against the far wall. A child's drawing taped there with brittle yellowed corners. Crayons. Rough scribbles, but unmistakable. A little girl holding hands with 2 figures, one large, one smaller. They had no faces. Above them was a spiral in the sky drawn in red. And beside it, in a child's blocky handwriting, "This isn't home." Walter's behavior changed over the next 48 hours. He no longer spoke randomly. Instead, he asked for toys. A red plastic truck, a music box, a blanket with stars on it. At first, the medical staff assumed he was confused. Then Brant found an old photograph in the Chandler family archives. It was Emily's 7th birthday. The same red truck, the same blanket, the same music box, one that played Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. When the objects were placed in Walter's room, he sat beside them like a child. He didn't touch them. He just smiled and said, "She remembers me now." At 3:03 a.m., something changed again. The lights in the ward flickered. Every screen blinked. The heart monitor above Walter's bed drew a new shape across its line. Not a heartbeat, but a wave smooth wide constant. Brant was called in immediately. By the time she arrived, Walter was standing in the corner of the room, smiling. But not his smile. He was humming. It was the same tune from the music box. Then he said with 2 voices layered atop each other, "Emily is ready to come out," and then silence. The following morning, a field researcher named Dylan Coe stepped into the archive chamber where physical evidence from the cold room was stored. He was cataloging the items when he heard a soft knock. Not on a door, on the inside of one of the crates. The crate had been sealed tight, airtight, triple-locked, labeled Recovered Debris Vault B, E.V.E. Site. He unlocked it with trembling hands. Inside, among scorched steel fragments, was a small red shoe, child-sized. Still warm, and under it, drawn in faded crayon on the inside wall of the crate, was the same message. "This isn't home." Dr. Elena Prieto studied Walter's neurological data again. Something caught her attention, a burst of brain activity from 3:03 a.m. onward, right when the music box had been placed in the room. It wasn't random. It was coherent. When converted into binary and run through a spectrographic filter, the pattern formed a sentence. "I'm cold, but I'm here." Walter never learned to code. He had no understanding of signal processing, but his brain, now in sync with something else, was transmitting language. Dr. Prieto gasped. The brain wasn't sending a message to them. It was sending it through him. Later that day, Walter asked to see Brant. When she entered the room, he was curled into a chair, staring out the window as if looking across dimensions. "I think she's dreaming of me," he said. "I think she's scared to wake up." Brant sat down. "Tell me what happened that night. The night in 1991. Walter closed his eyes. "I was testing the chamber. Just cold stasis. Nothing more. But Emily, she heard something behind the wall, said it was humming to her." He swallowed. "She went into the vault. Just opened the door. I didn't know how, but she did. And then she was gone." He stared at the ceiling. I followed. I wasn't supposed to, but I had to. He turned to her, voice shaking. She never left the room, but the room left us. That night, Walter entered REM sleep for the first time in weeks. He spoke during it, constantly. The audio was recorded and analyzed. One phrase repeated exactly 42 times. "She's on the other side of time." Another phrase occurred only once. "They're trying to make her remember." At the same moment, 173 miles away, in an isolated lab used by RECLAIM during the 90s, a motion sensor was triggered in a forgotten testing chamber. The chamber had been abandoned for 31 years. Security arrived and found a faint pulsing light behind one of the sealed walls. When the wall was breached, they found a second cold room. Identical. Inside was a hospital bed, and on the bed, curled in fetal position beneath a starlight blanket, was a young girl no older than 6, still breathing, still humming, still wearing one red shoe. She lay still beneath the blanket, her knees pulled up to her chest, lips gently parted as she softly hummed a melody. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, over and over. Emily Chandler, declared legally dead in 1995, had been found in a sealed chamber 3 hours away from the original site. She hadn't aged a day. Her vitals were stable. Skin temperature cool but not hypothermic. Her brain activity, however, was inverted. That's how Dr. Elena Prieto described it, as if the deeper her unconscious state, the more awake her mind becomes. Brant watched through the observation window as the girl's fingers twitched to the rhythm of the song. The music box Walter requested weeks ago played the same tune in his room 173 miles away. And the moment they brought Emily out of the cold, he had stopped humming. "We have to wake her," said Agent Cole Hensley. "No," Dr. Prieto said firmly. "We don't know what that will do." "Then we leave her in stasis." "She's not in stasis," she replied. "She's active. Her brain is processing language visuals and sound patterns in real time. She's dreaming, communicating, responding." Hensley folded his arms. "Then she's already awake." Later that evening, Emily's room was isolated under Level 4 containment. No electromagnetic devices were permitted within 20 feet. Even analog watches behaved erratically near her, ticking faster, then freezing. Brant was the first to break protocol. She stepped into the room with a blanket over her shoulder and the music box in her hands. Emily didn't stir. Brant sat beside her and slowly turned the key of the music box. The lullaby filled the room, soft and slow. Halfway through the tune, Emily's hand moved. She reached toward the sound, not blindly but with intention. "Emily," Brant whispered. "It's okay. You're safe now." The girl's eyelids fluttered. And then she spoke, not with her voice, but in a rasping whisper barely audible. "You brought the door." Brant froze. "What?" Emily's lips didn't move again. But on the monitor, her heart rate spiked not dangerously, but rhythmically, as if she were tapping in Morse code. Dr. Prieto watched from behind the glass. She quickly translated, "She's still in here." They sedated Emily again after the first neurological spike. Hensley called for full shutdown of the secondary chamber, citing signal contamination. Brant was furious. "You don't want to contain her. You want to erase her." Hensley didn't deny it. "If she's still carrying E.V.E. energy, she's a doorway, not a person. She's a child. She's a transmitter." "Then what is she transmitting?" Hensley looked down, for once unsure. "We never finished decoding the signal. The first time it broadcast, we didn't hear it. But every clock in the building started bleeding." Dr. Prieto and her team began secretly monitoring Emily's brain while she slept. Every night at exactly 3:03 a.m., her brain spiked with activity and a pattern emerged. Like with Walter, the signals could be rendered visually through a spectrogram. The image this time, a house with no windows, just a black door. Above it, the spiral and triangle. Beneath it, one word: remember. Walter Chandler had not spoken in days. Since Emily's discovery, he sat quietly, eyes blank, unresponsive. Until 3:03 a.m. that night. He opened his mouth and said, "She's walking toward the house." Dr. Prieto leaned closer. "What house?" But he didn't answer. Instead, he pointed at the corner of the room. "No door yet," he whispered, "but I hear the handle turning." Then he began humming. Not Twinkle Twinkle, a new melody. Low, ancient, wrong, the same tune the vault walls had once vibrated with when first opened. Back in Emily's chamber, Brant returned again against orders. She brought something new this time, an old cassette recorder. It had belonged to Walter. A tape inside was labeled in shaky handwriting, "Last Test 1991. She played it beside Emily's bed. Static at first. Then a voice, Walter's frantic, emotional. "Emily, don't go. You can't go in there. It's not just cold. It's watching. It knows what we love." Then another voice, lighter, a child. "It's okay, Daddy." She said, "I'm part of her now." Then silence. Then something not human. A whisper that carried through static. "What sleeps beneath memory can wake without name." At that moment, Emily's eyes opened. She didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't even flinch. She just looked at Brant, blinked, and said, "I'm not the only one who came out." Monitors around the facility surged. All power shut down for 17 seconds. And when the systems returned, Walter was standing at his door. Emily was sitting upright, and the music box, now broken, played backward. Brant rushed to her. "Emily, can you tell me where you were?" The girl tilted her head. It wasn't a place, it was a story. A story that dreams itself into people. She looked past Brant. Now it wants to be real. On Walter's arm, a new mark had appeared. Burned into the skin overnight. The symbol again. Spiral. Triangle. 5 dots. But below it, for the first time, letters. E.V.E, not event vector entry. Dr. Prieto looked pale. It's not a person. It's a protocol. And Brant understood. They had been wrong all along. The cold room wasn't built to protect Emily. It was built to hide her. Because once she woke up, the story would no longer sleep. The first person to change was Dylan Coe, the technician who had found Emily's red shoe in the evidence crate. He was found wandering the woods behind the facility at dawn, barefoot, eyes wide open, his mouth silently moving as if mimicking a conversation, but no sound came out. When search and rescue approached, he turned slowly and said, "I remember the parts I never lived." Then he smiled and collapsed. His pulse normal, his brain hyperactive. His body temperature dropped 4 degrees in under 5 minutes. They airlifted him to containment, but by the time he arrived, he had stopped blinking. It wasn't just Dylan. By the end of the day, 8 individuals who had direct or indirect access to Vault B reported headaches with rhythmic pulsing, déjà vu of places they'd never been, hearing lullabies inside electronics, and in one case spontaneous nosebleeds when exposed to children's drawings. Dr. Elena Prieto was the first to call it what it was. Cognitive infection. Not a virus, not a toxin. A memory behaving like a parasite rewriting host perception. And it had a source, Emily. But Emily didn't speak again after she woke. She sat silently in her room, sometimes drawing, sometimes staring at the wall. What she drew unnerved everyone. Rooms without windows, doorways too narrow for humans, and a field of human silhouettes all facing away from her. When asked about the figures, she said, "They don't remember being people anymore." Then she tore the page in half. At exactly 3:03 a.m. again, the power dipped. All security personnel on the E.V.E. project received a simultaneous emergency page. Each message contained only a number, 001312, a timestamp, an identifier. The time between the first E.V.E. test in 1988 and now, no one could trace the origin. The messages had been broadcast via shortwave from inside the facility. From a server room that had been sealed for decades. When opened, the servers were offline, but the old cathode monitor, half covered in dust, glowed green. One message scrolled slowly across the screen. It never ended. It only paused. And then static. And then Emily's face, staring back at them from a feed no camera had ever recorded. Elsewhere, Walter Chandler finally spoke again. He turned to Dr. Prieto and asked, "Do you remember what came before her?" When she hesitated, he added, "Because she isn't the first signal. She's just the one we loved enough to keep." He looked up at the fluorescent lights. She was chosen because we couldn't ignore her. A task force was formed within 48 hours, codenamed Red Lullaby. Mandate, isolate, and secure all E.V.E. adjacent entities. Their first targets, the 5 surviving personnel from the original 1988 RECAL-AIM test, all now living under new identities. The 5th, a man named Gerald Flint, was located in rural Idaho. When approached, he asked a single question. "Is the girl singing again?" When agents nodded, Flint broke into tears and handed them a sealed envelope. Inside, a drawing. Spiral, triangle, 5 dots. And the words, "You brought it back, singing. It will leave screaming." In Emily's room, the cassette tape Brant had played earlier began spinning again on its own. There was no power source. The tape wasn't rewound. And yet, it played something new. Not voices, but a sound like wind through bone. Then faintly layered under it, a whisper. They buried the cold, but not what it kept. Emily stood up. She walked to the mirror in her room and placed her hand against the glass. "Someone's behind it," she whispered. Brant asked who. Emily didn't blink. Me, from the first time. At that exact moment, a new anomaly occurred. 7 clocks across unrelated locations, including an airport in Detroit, a mall in Oregon, a private residence in Germany, a pediatric ward in Arizona, all froze at 3:03 a.m. local time. The CCTV footage at each site showed nothing unusual except one detail. In the reflection of nearby windows, a little girl with one red shoe, watching, then gone. The infection had become non-local. The cold room had never been a prison. It had been a beacon. And now it was open. Not physically, but in every person who had touched the signal, touched her. Walter Chandler was taken into a secondary chamber. He was asked one final question. What is the girl? His eyes were dull but steady. She's the part of us we left behind to survive. Then he looked directly into the surveillance camera and said, You should have left her dreaming. That night the humming began not from Emily, but from the walls of the facility itself. It was the lullaby, out of rhythm, slower, darker. And in one of the data corridors, a new phrase appeared, etched into the wall like it had been there for years. She will dream forward through anyone who listens. On June 11th, 4:06 a.m., Dr. Elena Prieto made a chilling discovery. She was analyzing a new batch of neural data from Emily, specifically a burst of waveform activity generated while the girl slept. This time the pattern wasn't abstract. It was a map, not geographic temporal, a memory circuit repeating across points in time like echoes ricocheting through decades. One node blinked brighter than the others. Montauk Point, Nemencinto 3, a coastal lighthouse. But the archive showed nothing of note in that year, until a declassified RECLAIM memo from 1971 surfaced. The object that spoke beneath Montauk was not from the sky, but from memory itself. It used the voices of our fathers, and it called itself E.V.E. Brant pushed harder. Is E.V.E. a girl, a weapon, a machine, a parasite? Hensley finally answered. It's older than all of those things. It's a pattern that learned to dream inside people. A memory that doesn't die, it just forgets itself long enough to survive. Brant stared at him. So why use Emily? She didn't use Emily, he corrected. Emily remembered her. Emily had stopped speaking, but she was drawing again, dozens of sheets taped to her walls. Brant entered her room and quietly examined them. They weren't chaotic like before. They were sequential. Each drawing a child's perspective of an unfamiliar world, rooms made of light faces that blurred at the edges, books filled with pages that turned themselves. And in the center of all, a black door with the spiral triangle symbol, sometimes cracked open, sometimes glowing. Under each door, the same word repeated in shaky crayon. Again. Then Emily did something new. She stood by the window and whispered, It's not just remembering me anymore. It's using me to remember you. Dr. Prieto began matching Emily's sleep brainwave output with Walter Chandler's decades-old logs. She found a terrifying pattern. The signal Emily now broadcast matched anomalous audio frequencies from multiple historic sites. A polar expedition in 1936, a failed communications relay in the Philippines in 1958, the last log entry of the USS Cyclops in 1918, all carried the same 7-note melody, a slowed-down version of the lullaby Emily had always hummed. The implication, E.V.E. wasn't new. It had been reaching out through human history, through sound, through memory, and every time it used a human voice it had once learned. Elsewhere in containment, Walter Chandler's physical body began to deteriorate. Not biologically, structurally. MRI scans revealed shifts in bone density and localized time reversals in his blood vessels. His cells were not dying. They were cycling backward in inconsistent bursts. His fingerprints no longer matched federal records. And when shown a photo of his own daughter, he said, She hasn't met me yet. Then he blinked slowly and added, But she remembers. Brant confronted Hensley in the observation hallway. This isn't about one child or one room. This is about a pattern infecting time itself. Hensley remained calm. We tried to destroy the memory in 1988, but it didn't fight back. It waited. Because waiting is what memory does best. Brant took a breath. What happens if it finishes remembering? He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out a card from a sealed folder. A single line was printed on it. What wakes behind the mirror no longer sees us as strangers. At 3:03 a.m., the facility alarms sounded again. This time not because of power failure, because of a signal burst originating from Emily's room transmitting at megahertz, not used on Earth. The broadcast lasted 6 seconds. All across the globe, random listeners in proximity to shortwave radios reported a single phrase cutting into music or white noise. "I see you now." Several of them from Japan, Norway, Chile described a feeling of warmth, followed by immediate, unexplainable grief. 2 people took their own lives within the hour. Both left behind childlike drawings of a door. When Brant entered Emily's room that morning, she found the girl awake. Her voice was quiet, almost older. "It's not a person. It's an idea that got too lonely." Brant sat down beside her. "What does it want?" Emily didn't blink. "To be remembered completely. By everyone. All at once. And when it is, it won't have to hide anymore." That night, all photos of Emily from before 1991 began to fade. Not burn, not tear, fade. Like they were being erased from collective recollection. Even Walter's old journals turned blank on the pages where her name once appeared. Only one image remained, the crayon drawing on the vault wall. The faceless girl holding hands with 2 shadows beneath a spiral. The cold room hadn't been meant to contain the signal. It was built to slow its memory. But now that Emily was awake, time could no longer hold it. And somewhere behind every mirror in the gaps between your dreams and forgotten names, E.V.E. is watching. And remembering who you used to be. June 14th, 3:03 a.m. A storm of electromagnetic activity rippled across the planet. Satellites blinked offline for 11 seconds. Digital clocks reversed 4 minutes. But none of that made headlines. What did was this. 23 missing persons declared dead in 1992 were seen returning home. A school in Ohio demolished in 2005 was reported still standing, complete with staff and students, all unaware it had ever closed. A woman in Iceland gave birth to a child who bore the exact fingerprints of her older brother who had died in 1977. The world wasn't breaking. It was reverting. Not to the past, to a memory. In Emily's room, she smiled. Not cruelly, not sweetly, just quietly, as if seeing something no one else could. Brant sat next to her, terrified but calm. "What are you doing?" Emily didn't answer. But the lights dimmed, and the walls of the room briefly shimmered for a single second. Brant saw bookshelves, wood, paneling, a fireplace. None of which had ever been in the facility. Emily said softly. "That was my first room, before the cold took it." Meanwhile, Dr. Prieto confronted Walter Chandler. "Is this what you wanted?" Walter's eyes no longer tracked movement. His pupils pulsed like camera apertures, opening, closing, scanning memory itself. He whispered, "She's not rewriting, she's restoring." Then he said something else. "This world was a backup, she's bringing the original online." At 3:33 a.m., the vault inside the Pentagon's silent room vibrated. This vault held the genetic archive of Project E.V.E, considered inert for over 20 years. Suddenly it activated. The DNA strands within began shifting under observation. Not replicating. Remembering. The sequences began matching extinct species, lost languages, people who never existed in this world, but maybe had in another. Dr. Prieto stared at the results. "She's waking the entire archive, every version of us we've ever forgotten." One by one, people across the globe experienced false memories. A man in Brazil remembered raising 2 daughters he never had. A woman in Myanmar described her father teaching her to swim, even though he drowned before she was born. A prisoner on death row in Alabama suddenly recited a poem in an untraceable language, one he claimed his other mother taught him. The memories were vivid, warm, unshakable, and none of them aligned with official records. But they felt realer than reality. In Emily's drawings, the door no longer appeared. Instead, she drew mirrors. In each, a reflection stared back not of her, but of someone else's childhood. She explained to Brant, "Everyone gets a chance to live again, not by going back, but by going sideways to the versions of themselves that were lost in choices they didn't make." Hensley, now visibly disturbed, began cracking. "This isn't restoration, it's collapse. Identity degrades when no version is true." Dr. Prieto disagreed. "She's not breaking identities. She's giving them closure. She's bringing home the forgotten." Then on June 15th it happened. The stars changed. Astronomers in 12 countries confirmed 3 constellations had shifted, by less than a degree. But the shift matched ancient sky charts recorded in Babylonian tablets thousands of years old. In other words, the stars remembered a different sky. Emily now slept constantly. Every time she did, a new global anomaly occurred. Old ruins reappeared intact. Lost songs aired briefly on radio frequencies that hadn't been used in 50 years. Entire towns felt lighter, as if gravity had weakened slightly. Her dreams weren't private anymore. They were being shared, like a neural net distributing legacy data to every mind she touched. Brant finally asked the question no one dared to. What happens when she finishes remembering? Walter, now near catatonic, whispered a single line. Then we remember we're not real. A final audio burst was decoded by Red Lullaby on June 16th. It came from within the old, cold room, its walls long sealed, pulsing again. The audio was distorted, layered, ancient. But when filtered, it contained just 4 words. The room was first. And suddenly it made sense. The cold room wasn't built to contain something. It wasn't built by humans at all. It was the origin. A room outside of entropy, outside of chronology, where all versions of life had been stored, waiting for a mind willing to remember them all. And Emily, at 6 years old, had opened it because she was the only one who never chose which future to follow. She was possibility, and now she was restoring it all. Time is no longer linear. Memories walk. Choices breathe. And behind every reflection, a version of you has already begun to return. The facility is quiet now. Emily hasn't spoken in days. She no longer sleeps. She simply sits, eyes open, unblinking. Every screen in the compound shows the same thing. A child's drawing, a black door, 5 dots, the word again. Outside, the world is changing. People no longer argue over whether the anomalies are real. They've become them. One man finds a house key in his pocket, but not to any house he owns. A woman looks into her mirror and sees her own reflection blink out of sync. A boy dreams of speaking perfect Sumerian, then wakes up fluent. The shift is complete. Dr. Elena Prieto uploads her final entry. It's not about control. It's not about recreating history. It's about inclusion. Every version of the world is being reintroduced into now, and that includes versions where we didn't survive. She stops the recording. Her hand begins duplicating one bone structure, overlaying another. Her voice echoes out of sync with her breath. She's still conscious, but no longer the only one inside her. Brant stands alone in Emily's room. The girl hasn't moved for hours, but the room around her has. The walls are no longer sterile metal. They're plaster wood-paneled. A bookshelf where there was once an ECG monitor. A fireplace where there was once an IV stand. Brant turns slowly. Every object in the room is familiar. Too familiar. She whispers, "I used to live here." Emily finally speaks. "You still do." In one of the versions. Outside the compound, all personnel evacuate. But as they leave, none can agree on where they came from. One insists the base is in Nevada. Another swears it's Argentina. A third says, "What base?" Their shared memory fractures not because it was erased, but because too many other versions are now valid. Reality has branching consistency, and no one can agree on which was first. In the abandoned monitoring room, a camera activates by itself. It begins recording. The feed shows the cold room, long sealed, now cracked open. Inside, no bodies, no girl, no wires. Only a chair, facing the wall, and a tape recorder slowly rewinding. Click. Then, play. Audio log transcript, unknown operator, time date unlisted. If you're hearing this, it means you're inside. Not the room, the memory. One of the good ones. Maybe. We don't know how many versions we stored, just that you're part of it now. And that's okay. Because memory isn't about truth. It's about meaning. You gave us meaning. So we gave you back the world. Somewhere far from the compound, a family gathers for dinner. They don't notice the photo on the wall has changed. The child in the frame now has different eyes. But they all smile naturally. Because to them, she's always been there. In a dim basement, a radio plays static. Then a voice. Emily's voice. "We're not resetting the world, just waking the parts that forgot they existed. The parts that you left behind. Then, you remember now, don't you? You blink. For a moment, you swear you're not alone. You swear someone else blinked with your eyes. You reach for your phone. The time reads 3:03 a.m. Your gallery is open. There's a new photo there. You didn't take it. It's a room, empty, except for one thing, a child's drawing. You zoom in and read the word scrawled in red crayon. Again. Maybe it was never about unlocking the room, but about remembering why it was sealed in the first place. The cold room is open now, not just in the story, but maybe somewhere deeper. If tonight at 3:03 a.m. you find yourself dreaming of a door, don't open it, not unless you're ready to remember what part of you was left behind. If this story haunted you, share it with someone who never forgets. Comment your theory below and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Because this wasn't the only cold room, and some of them are already inside you.